There are moments that slip past us so quietly. We don't recognize their weight until much later. Only in hindsight do we realize they were the turning points that redefined everything. For me, that moment came on an April morning when the sunlight still slanted softly through the office windows and the air still held the scent of fresh coffee, just like any other day. But what sank to the bottom that day wasn't my coffee. It was the trust I had guarded carefully through 7 years of working at Braden & Co., a creative media agency in South Austin. My name is Lauren Gray, 34 years old, once the senior content director of our media strategy department. My work was about crafting emotionally driven marketing campaigns, the kind that didn't just make people remember a brand, but made them want to stay connected to it. I believed in real stories, in the way someone's eyes lit up when they shared them, in the voices that could make you stop in the middle of a busy day. I wrote, I edited, I pitched, often. I was the last to leave the office during deadline weeks, when the elevator had already switched to night maintenance mode. Braden & Co. wasn't some giant corporation, but in the fast-turning world of advertising, where everything shifts with every scroll and swipe, we had built a reputation on something very simple truth. My team and I were once invited to speak at universities. We were quoted in industry magazines for our campaign Find Your Way Back, created for a mental wellness brand. We didn't sell products. We sparked connection. And I always believed I was an essential part of that movement. Then came Ava Spencer. Ava wasn't new to the business, which somehow made her even harder to read. She had worked at a major agency in New York and moved to Austin to reclaim real creativity. According to her HR file, at first, I assumed she was just another art director searching for stability. She was beautiful, intelligent, quick to read the room, and she easily charmed her way into the good graces of senior leadership. I didn't see a reason to worry, not until the tone in our meetings started to shift. Brainstorm sessions I used to lead were now interrupted by slides Ava had prepared separately. Concepts I'd submitted for testing suddenly reappeared in proposals under her name, only tweaked with different colors or small changes. I didn't say anything. Similar ideas happen all the time, but it didn't stop there. A high-profile campaign called Second Breath, worth nearly $1 million and assigned to me at the beginning of the year, was abruptly redirected. I found out I had been cut from the team when my name disappeared from the project assignment emails. I asked Thomas Braden, the CEO himself, the man who had once personally hired me, and he gave me an answer that froze me inside. Ava brings a fresh perspective. We want to try something different. No explanation, no acknowledgement, months of prep work, client meetings, late-night strategy calls with the design team as if none of it had ever happened. I watched Ava walk onto the stage during the pitch, delivering a polished version of the words I had once written, and the boardroom erupted in applause. I remember that moment so vividly. The projection light washed over her face, making her look like she was glowing, and me. I was just a blurred shadow in the back row. I left before the meeting ended, and for the first time in years, I couldn't bring myself to enter the office the next morning. 3 days later, HR called me in. No warning signs, no official explanation, just Ava, the CEO, and the head of HR in the room. Ava's voice was soft, almost regretful. Lauren, we truly value everything you've contributed, but after reviewing performance, the company feels it's time for a different direction. I didn't respond. I wasn't even surprised anymore. This so-called performance review came with no metrics, no real feedback, only one undeniable fact. I had been pushed out by someone who once looked me in the eyes and said, "I've learned so much from you." That afternoon, I packed my things in silence. No one said a word. Some lowered their heads to avoid meeting my eyes. Others pretended to be absorbed in work. Only Casey, a former intern I had once mentored, walked over and gently placed her hand on my shoulder as I stood by the elevator. "I don't know what's going on, but I'm really sorry." I nodded. I didn't say anything. I wasn't looking for pity. I needed acknowledgement. But that, no one dared to give. I returned to my small apartment on the west side of the city just as the rain started to fall. The drops tapped against the window like a quiet metronome of reality. I sat on the sofa without turning on the lights. The room was dark, but not darker than what I was feeling inside. For years, I had believed I was building a career. It turned out I was just laying the tracks for someone else's climb. That night, I called my younger sister, the only family member I still spoke to since last year's New Year dinner, when I told her I'd just been fired. There was silence on the other end. Then she said, "I'm sure they had their reasons." That line made something in me shift. Maybe people don't see you the way you think they do, even in a family. You don't need betrayal to hurt each other that deeply. A simple lack of belief is enough. I hung up and looked down at my hands, the same hands that had once crafted campaigns to inspire people, that had shaken others firmly during contract signings, now trembled from the weight of humiliation. It felt like I'd been pushed off a train I had helped build from the ground up. I didn't know where I'd go next. I didn't even know if anyone still wanted my ideas. All I knew was that I had lost everything. Not just my job title, or my salary, or my standing, but my faith in people, in trust, in the relationships I once believed were unbreakable. I stood up, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop out of habit. The screen blinked back with a black background and white words. No connection. I closed it. For the first time in years, I let myself fall. But what I didn't realize then was that in that fall, I had accidentally landed in a deeper place, a place where there was no one left to lean on, no one left to believe in me, only myself, and a truth I had never faced before, that if no one else sees your worth anymore, you must be the first to see it again. The first days after leaving Braden & Co. passed slowly, almost suffocatingly. I did nothing, or more precisely, I avoided everything. No social media, no contact with anyone in the industry, no response to the polite messages saying things like "so sorry to hear" or "it'll all work out." I didn't need those words, because I knew the people who sent them didn't really understand what it felt like to be cast out of something that once felt like your entire world. Every morning, I still woke up on time, still made coffee like I was preparing for another deadline. But then I would just sit by the window, watching the traffic move past like a world unaware that someone who used to run alongside it had now quietly disappeared. I didn't think I was falling into depression. I still ate, still slept, still paid my bills on time. But everything felt like it was being done by an old version of myself, one that had been hollowed out. Then one night, I opened an old file on my laptop by accident. It was the original presentation for the Second Breath campaign, before it was taken from me. Slide number 12 showed a photo I had once taken from a hospital window, back when my mother was in treatment. Light streamed through a thin plastic curtain, creating a shaft of brightness against the quiet fear of the room. Below it, I had written a single line: "Trust is not a slogan. It is what remains when everything else has fallen away." That sentence caught my breath. I had written that once. I had believed it. So why? Just because I'd been betrayed? Had I also let go of the very thing I once chose to live by? I began going for morning walks, carrying a small notebook. No goals, no deadlines, just writing down things that made me feel life still had rhythm. A phrase overheard at a coffee shop, the sound of someone playing guitar on the sidewalk, sunlight resting on the door of an old bookstore I used to visit as a student. Slowly, I began to hear something inside me again. It wasn't the voice of pain anymore. It was fragments of ideas beginning to settle back into place, not fast, but steady. One day, I got an email from Lauren Bassett, a former colleague now working at a small startup focused on mental wellness. She said they were preparing to launch a community campaign. Their budget was tight, their staff short, but they needed someone experienced to guide the process. I know you're taking time off, but if you're looking to do something meaningful, we could really use you. It took me 1 minute to reply, coffee tomorrow afternoon. It was the first time I'd returned to Scout and Bean since I got fired. Lauren arrived 10 minutes late, flustered, carrying an iPad and a stack of printed papers. "I'm warning you, we're a mess," she said, half laughing. I smiled, not to pretend I was okay, but because, for the first time in a long while, I actually felt something real. Someone needed me for who I was, not for my title or reputation. I agreed to serve as an advisor for 2 months, unpaid. Lauren hesitated, but I nodded. I don't need money right now. I need a reason to start again. The campaign was called Inside Out, a project about embracing pain as a natural part of life. The theme was so close to what I was living through. I couldn't stay on the sidelines. I began working with a young team, fresh graduates who still stumbled when they spoke, but had a clear light in their eyes. I didn't instruct them like a veteran. I worked with them to rediscover what had once been instinct, how to tell a story that reaches the human part of someone else. One day, a team member asked me, "Aren't you afraid of being taken advantage of again?" I paused, then answered quietly, "No, because this time I chose to step in. I wasn't pushed. I had been betrayed before. That didn't mean every place would be the same, and I couldn't let that betrayal shape the rest of my future." But not everything went smoothly. During production, the team hit roadblocks. Files were lost because no one had backed them up properly. Deadlines slipped due to lack of manpower. A potential partner pulled out at the last minute, doubting the team's ability. I felt that familiar surge of frustration rise, the kind I used to suppress in meetings at my old job. But this time, I didn't let it dictate my reaction. I rewrote the entire media plan from scratch, broke it down step by step, reassigned responsibilities, and personally edited a sample video to help the team understand what emotional storytelling really meant. No lectures, no theory, just showing them and doing it together. That night, they looked at me differently, not because I was better than them, but because I stayed. I didn't walk away when things got hard. After 2 months, the Inside Out campaign launched on social media. The first video was only 60 seconds long, no fancy background music, just faces of real people and handwritten lines about moments they wanted to forget. I used to think I wasn't good enough. I was fired after 10 years of loyalty. I felt invisible. Each line struck a different chord. And then, a final message appeared. You don't have to be perfect to be seen. You only need to start with yourself. Within a week, the video had over 300,000 shares. The team's inbox was flooded with messages from strangers thanking them. Local news outlets began to take notice. A small agency in Houston reached out to discuss collaboration. And me. I was no longer just in the background. They called my name. Lauren hugged me during our final team meeting. "You have no idea how much we admire you." I smiled and looked out the window. The June rain had just stopped, and the wet pavement shimmered under a fractured sky. I knew I hadn't gotten revenge, not in the way people usually mean it, but I was finding my way back, one quiet step at a time. No need for noise, no need to be seen immediately. What mattered was, this time, I knew I was moving in the right direction. I used to think that the moment of readiness would arrive like a loud bell ringing through a quiet night, like a brilliant revelation after stumbling through the dark for too long. But it didn't come like that at all. It came slowly, quietly, like a deep breath I didn't even realize had changed me. After launching the first project under the name Gray Matter Studio, a small collaboration with a nonprofit supporting women recovering from depression, the invitations I began to receive no longer felt like experiments. A mid-tier cosmetics brand, a digital education platform, and a social finance organization all reached out at the same time, asking for guidance on emotional storytelling strategies. There were no rigid clauses, no demands for accolades or portfolios. They said only one thing, that they needed someone who could write to the things their audiences didn't know how to say. I remember clearly the moment I stood in front of the whiteboard in my workspace, afternoon light softening through the half-length curtains, next to the succulent I'd brought from my old home, pen in hand. I felt an unexpected calm, no more fear of ideas being stolen, no more craving for validation. I began outlining a broader, more ambitious campaign framework, built on the principle of sustainable connection between brands and their audiences, no longer chasing empty metrics, likes with no meaning, or carefully polished slogans. I wanted the words to reach into the silent spaces inside people, the unspoken griefs, the unnamed crises, the lost trust in a world that often feels like nothing more than performance. That was when I received an email from Ethan Keller, the new brand director at Zenova Pharmaceuticals. He had once been the deputy director, back when Second Breath was still just a concept in closed meetings. The email was short, just 3 lines. I heard you've launched your own studio. I still remember the slide with the hospital curtain and the light. We'd like to meet. Not a single word about my former company. No vague disclaimers, but I understood the message. Zenova hadn't given up on that campaign. They had only been waiting for the right person to bring it back. And now, that person wasn't a polished team wrapped in a glossy brand name, but someone who had stepped out from the crack where everything once seemed to end. We met in a co-working space in South Congress, a place with raw brick walls and soft yellow light, not flashy, but warm. Ethan came alone. We sat across from each other, 2 cups of unsweetened tea and a packet of documents between us. He got straight to the point. We want to relaunch Second Breath, but this time, not with the old concept. We want a campaign that doesn't feel like PR, that doesn't try to fix people. We just want to be present with them at their most vulnerable. I nodded, not because I agreed right away, but because I had been thinking about that very idea for a long time. Emotion should never be commercialized, but it can be honored if you approach it without trying to reshape it into something more palatable. After the meeting, Ethan sent over a draft contract. I read every line carefully, and for the first time, I evaluated my worth without attaching it to the reputation of any company. I revised a few terms, added a clause proposing long-term strategic collaboration if the first campaign proved successful, not because I needed to bind them, but because I wanted to set a new standard for myself. This time, no one would be allowed to touch what I created without understanding where it came from. During preparations for the campaign, I crossed paths with someone from my past, Casey, the former intern who had placed her hand on my shoulder the day I left Braden. She was now working at a different agency. When she heard I had opened a studio, she sent an email asking if she could collaborate. I didn't respond right away. I needed to be sure I wasn't making decisions based on emotion. But then we met briefly at our old coffee shop. Casey showed me her notebook, filled with lines like how to write without faking it, and clients don't need viral. They need empathy. I knew then she wasn't just looking for a job. She was searching for something many in our field had lost belief in, the power of real storytelling. I brought Casey on, and together we rebuilt a small team of just 3, not many, but enough to share ideas and keep the bond between writer and reader intact. We held meetings around the kitchen table, brainstormed on notepads, edited video clips while waiting for coffee to brew. No fancy office, no elaborate branding package, but we had something I had once lost the feeling of, truly being seen by each other. The final turning point came on an August afternoon, when Zenova officially approved the full campaign script and production schedule. I was in the editing room at the time, light from the screen illuminating Casey's face as she reviewed the voiceover draft. I could hear myself in every word she wrote, not because she was imitating me, but because we were walking the same direction. I stepped out onto the balcony. The hot wind rising from the pavement below contrasted with the calm I felt inside. After all this time, I was ready to return, not because someone had signaled it was time, not because there was a clear, happy ending ahead, just because I, finally, was ready to keep writing without being afraid of the blank page. That night, I opened my personal email and typed a single line addressed to myself. You don't need to beat anyone. You just need to reclaim yourself. Then I shut the laptop. I knew the rest would no longer require any grand declarations, just action. I never planned to return for applause. There was no grand announcement, no ribbon cutting, no need to stand in a crowded auditorium recounting the past as if it were some kind of achievement. But the day did come when I stepped back into the light, not because someone pulled me up, but because I had quietly risen, one step at a time, and finally arrived at where I was meant to be when the new campaign for Zenova launched. I sat in the back row of the press conference, the same kind of seat I once occupied when Ava stood on stage in my place. Only this time, I didn't feel small. I looked up at the screen, where the faces of real patients appeared through unfiltered frames. No flashy lighting, no powerful narration, just raw, trembling voices speaking clearly. Each story was a sliver of faith, a living testament to the message we had committed to from the very beginning, that emotion doesn't need embellishment. It just needs to be met at the right moment. The campaign, titled Still Breathing, reached record engagement in just 3 weeks, but the number wasn't what moved me. It was an email from a stranger that did. I'm currently in recovery after cancer treatment, and that video made me feel less alone. I finished reading it and turned off my screen. No reply was needed. Just the feeling itself was enough, a quiet affirmation that everything I once believed had never lost its worth. It had only been buried for a while beneath the dust of power plays. Since Gray Matter Studio began operating, I haven't once spoken publicly about Braden & Co. No interviews, no lessons from betrayal stories, no rehashing the past, even when people encouraged me to share it for inspiration. I declined, because I understand this much to truly take revenge through success. You don't need to name villains. You just need to do the work so well that they're forced to look back. And eventually, that moment arrived, quietly. One Monday morning, Casey sent me a link to an industry article. The headline on the front page read, Braden & Co. loses 3 major contracts in 1 quarter. Below it were expert assessments, inconsistent content strategy, leadership team lacks foundational experience. Ava's name was no longer listed on the company's LinkedIn page. There was no farewell post, no announcement about where she had gone. I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. What I felt was something closing, like the sound of a door shutting in the distance, quiet but echoing. It could have been different if they hadn't misjudged the true value of someone just because she didn't speak loudly. But now, that silence had become the clearest response of all. Since then, my studio hasn't needed to search for clients. They come to us. Some of the people who once worked with me at Braden have also reached out asking to collaborate. I didn't say no to all of them, but I didn't say yes to everyone either. I chose those who truly wanted to create something meaningful, not out of bitterness, but because I've learned this: if you want to build something that lasts, you have to be careful with every brick you lay. I didn't want to be pulled back into half-hearted partnerships or colleagues who only show up when the spotlight is on. I believe in building from what I believe, not in reclaiming what others once stole. One early autumn afternoon, after wrapping up our first internal meeting with a nonprofit focused on education, I stepped out of the room and sat by the window. The soft sunlight filtered through the trees and cast shadows onto the sidewalk. An email popped up from someone who had been a major client at Braden. He wrote, "We chose someone else before because they said what we wanted to hear, but now we need someone willing to say what's right. And I remember you." I didn't respond immediately. I let it sit, as a quiet reminder that if you remain true to your values, the real things always come back late, but certain. The day I was invited to speak at a small media conference in Austin, I nearly declined. I didn't like the idea of turning my journey into a trophy, but I agreed. Not to talk about the fall, but to speak about how I stood up again without the noise. During the session, I looked straight at the audience and said only one sentence: "No one can take away your true worth. They can only make you forget it for a while." The room fell quiet, no roaring applause, but I saw something in someone's eyes shift, like a thread deep inside had just been touched. That evening, as I stepped out of the conference center, a soft rain began to fall. It reminded me of the night I was pushed out of the office. Same light drizzle, cold and steady, but this time, I didn't lower my head. I walked slowly through it, coat draped loosely over my shoulders, not rushing to stay dry. Each drop felt like it was washing away a piece of the old memory, leaving behind a different version of Lauren, not stronger, but steadier, because I had lived through the days when no one believed in me. I had stayed quiet long enough to hear what still remained inside. I didn't take revenge through anyone else's downfall. I did it by still being here, doing the work I believe in, and being seen. I don't need anyone to apologize. What I needed most was simply to know that I had not been lost. And if one day Ava scrolls past a campaign with my name on it, maybe she won't stop to read it. But perhaps, somewhere deep down, she'll realize that some things cannot be replaced by a title, that certain truths only reveal themselves once we let go of the illusion of winning. I haven't closed the door on the past. I've simply walked beyond it. I didn't plan on revenge, at least not in the conventional sense. But sometimes, when all you do is quietly focus on your own work, the steadiness of your presence alone is enough to shake what once seemed unshakable on the other side. I started noticing it through unexpected messages from former partners. A brand director I had once collaborated with on the Find Your Way Back campaign messaged me privately to say he was impressed by the newly released Inside Out project. He wrote, "I wasn't surprised to learn you were behind it. The signature was obvious." I replied with nothing more than a simple emoji, but inside, it felt like someone had stirred a current I thought had long dried up. 3 weeks later, another message arrived. This time, it was from Jackson Fields, a senior content director at a major pharmaceutical company in Chicago. He had previously declined a contract with Braden & Co. about 6 months ago. He asked if I might be interested in consulting for an emotional campaign aimed at early-stage cancer patients. I asked him directly, "Why me?" He answered, "Because I just heard Braden lost the Zenova contract, and I figured, you're no longer with them." That piece of news stunned me for a few seconds. Zenova was the client behind the Second Breath campaign the one pulled from my hands, so they canceled the contract. And no one said a word, no press release, no internal statement, just a blank space in the market news. But in that space, I could hear an echo. I checked Braden's public channels. A few older posts had been removed. Product launches were postponed. There were no official videos. Ava was still showing up at events, still on stage in her tailored blazers with a microphone in hand. But her words had begun to repeat themselves. They lacked depth. I didn't need to be there to know they were losing their direction. Emotion isn't something you can copy. And when you push the real storyteller out of the frame, what's left is just an empty rehearsal. A month later, I officially signed consulting agreements with 3 different startups. They didn't come to me because I was a big name. They came because they had seen results. They didn't ask for a portfolio. They only asked if I had time. Each contract was small, but they were enough to show me I was building something new. Quietly, without banners or announcements, during an internal meeting. I overheard one of the younger team members say, "Lauren doesn't teach us how to go viral. She teaches us how to tell the truth." That line brought me back to the early days of my career, when I was writing articles for a medical magazine with long hours and low pay, but I never once doubted what I was doing. The turning point came on a July morning. Lauren sent me a screenshot from social media. It was a leaked message where Ava complained that the current content isn't keeping users engaged and that the board is pressuring her over unmet results. Under the post were dozens of comments from former employees and anonymous partners. Many mentioned me without even saying my name. One wrote, "That campaign wasn't really Ava's. Anyone who worked on it knows who wrote the actual voiceover." Another replied, "Lauren Gray was the soul of Braden. Without her, it's just noise." I didn't feel triumphant, but I took note. This wasn't a downfall I engineered. It was the result of choosing the wrong light to follow, and now that light was beginning to shift, revealing the shadows they once hid. I didn't respond to journalists when they started asking whether I had anything to do with Zenova pulling out. I simply said I had left the company before the campaign was implemented, and anything after that was no longer my decision. I didn't confirm or deny anything else. I let the silence speak, and it did better than any public rebuttal ever could. One afternoon, I got a call from Thomas Braden himself. His voice no longer carried the arrogance it had when he let me go. He asked if we could meet, said there were a few things he'd like to discuss. I agreed, not because I wanted to return, but because I already knew what was coming. The office that once suffocated me now felt strangely still. No campaign posters, no busy foot traffic. Thomas sat alone. No Ava, no HR. He got to the point. "I was wrong to remove you from that role. We underestimated how much real emotion matters in content strategy. Ava is lost, and I need someone who knows how to reconnect with an audience." I didn't answer right away. I simply asked, "Why not call Ava?" He sighed. "She's brilliant with support, but now there's no one left to support her." The meeting didn't last long. I left without signing anything, but I carried something clear with me. They were starting to feel the emptiness I had once quietly tried to fill, and it was that very absence now making them stumble. I didn't need to confront anyone. I just had to keep doing the work, and the results would speak for me. A week later, I launched my own platform, Gray Matter Studio, a creative space focused on real storytelling, aimed at building lasting relationships between brands and communities. No massive investments, no flashy press, just a simple landing page, a curated list of past projects, and one line at the top. We tell the stories people tried to forget within 3 days. The inbox had over 20 partnership requests. Some of them came from names who had once declined me when I was still at Braden. The night before our official launch, I sat alone in my new office, small, softly lit, no scent of premium coffee, just the smell of fresh paper and raw wood. I opened my laptop and typed the headline for our introduction when every door closes. Sometimes you don't need to open a new one. You just rebuild with the bricks they threw away. And in that moment, I knew I was no longer at the starting line. I was standing somewhere they could no longer follow,